since the 2017 mass shooting at that music festival in Las Vegas.
And just to go in everyone's home in the United States and grab a particular product.
To propose regulations to ban all devices that turn legal weapons into machine guns.
The new case will decide whether the ban violated a federal law by changing the bump stock.
It is preventing the next mass shooting, and it is critical to cut off the easy access to these weapons of war.
To me, what you would do about guns that would have prevented what happened in Sandy Hook, if you want to do what you did in the UK, right, which is ban virtually all guns.
Supreme Court to review Trump-era bump stock ban. The Supreme Court said it will consider a challenge to a Trump-era regulation that bans so-called bump stocks, an arms modification that increases the rate of fire of semi-auto rifles. In a brief unsigned order, the court agreed to decide the case, known as Garland v. Cargill. There were no noted dissents. The justices also took up a case involving the National Rifle Association and a third dispute related to arbitration agreements. At the center of the legal battle over bump stocks is a rule from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, or ATF, issued in 2018 that expanded the definition of mash gun prohibited under the National Firearms Act to include bump stocks. Any person found with the device would be subject to a felony. The ban arose after an armed man used semi-auto weapons outfitted with bump stock devices in a 2017 mass slayings in Las Vegas that slayed 58 people and injured more than 500.
Since the 2017 mass shooting at that music festival in Las Vegas.
Las Vegas was terrible, but to do a knee-jerk reaction.
This administration issued a ban on bump stocks, a ruling that ever since has been challenged by gun right advocates.
And just to go in everyone's home in the United States and grab a particular product.
That this bill would ban weapons that are in common use in the United States today.
On the weapons ban. This morning, the court ruled the ban is constitutional.
This is the same device a gunman used to kill 58 people at a Las Vegas concert back in 2017.
The devices allowed the slayer to fire several hundred rounds of ammunition into the crowd that were attending a concert. It was the deadliest mass slaying in U.S. history. The legal fight over the bump stock ban. Michael Cargill, who is the plaintiff in the action that is currently being heard by the court, purchased 2 bump stocks in April 2018, which was after the ban went into effect. On the very same day, he challenged the restriction in a legal proceeding before a federal district court in Texas, citing a number of different reasons for doing so. The lower court agreed with the plaintiff, the United States of America, and reached the conclusion that bump stocks enable the user to fire many shots with just one stroke of the finger. It was also discovered that adding a bump stock to one arm makes it capable of automatically firing more than one shot. This is due to the fact that the device itself is a self-acting mechanism that enables continuous discharge. A panel of 3 judges from the Court of Appeals agreed with the result reached by the lower court, which was that bump stocks satisfied the definition of mash guns under federal law. However, the full Court of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit overturned the ruling made by the panel.
Supreme Court will consider a challenge to a Trump-era ban on so-called bump stocks.
To propose regulations to ban all devices that turn legal weapons into machine guns.
Now, owners of bump stocks are required to destroy the devices or turn them into federal authorities.
Those are accessories to semi-automatic rifles that increase the rate of fire.
I expect that these critical regulations will be finalized.
The new case will decide whether the ban violated a federal law by changing the bump stock.
Firing rapidly, almost at the same rate as a machine gun, and that's why these will be banned starting tonight.
This was done in accordance with a legal principle that mandates the court take the position of the challenger whenever a statute is ambiguous. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal came to its conclusion that a non-mechanical bump stock is not considered to be a mash gun under the law after finding that the National Firearms Act is vague in 2 different places. The ATF's regulation didn't modify the scope of the prohibition on mash guns. Rather, it was a means of alerting the public of the agency's position that bump stocks are machine weapons. In April, the Biden administration urged the Supreme Court to take up the argument over the bump stock ban. They argued that the ATF's rule didn't expand the extent of the prohibition on mash guns. A single pull of the trigger enables a shooter to fire hundreds of shots per minute when using a bump stock on their arm. The Department of Justice informed the Supreme Court in a filing that rifles outfitted with bump stocks are extremely hazardous, just like other types of mash guns.
The Supreme Court has rejected an effort from gun rights advocates to challenge the ban on what are called bump stocks.
Gun violence does not discriminate. It happens everywhere and all the time.
A ruling that today was upheld when the Supreme Court declined to hear 2 cases challenging the ban.
Here's the amount of gun violence that has happened. I think we're reaching a tipping point where we're about to hit desensitization to gun violence.
By the way, bump stocks, we're writing that out. I'm writing that out myself.
Today's decision, which gun safety advocates are declaring a big victory.
And that is why Congress banned the acquisition of such weapons. The decision below contradicts the best interpretation of the statute, creates an acknowledged circuit conflict, and threatens significant harm to public safety. The administration of President Joe Biden argued before the court that the judgment of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is in contrast with those of at least 3 other appellate courts, all of which had previously rejected challenges to the bump stock ban. The Supreme Court of the United States also chosen not to hear challenges to the regulation and has not blocked efforts to put it into effect. If allowed to stand, Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar warned that the consequences of the lower court's ruling will likely reverberate nationwide and is likely to mean that manufacturers within the Fifth Circuit will be able to make and sell bump stocks to individuals without background checks and without registering or serializing the devices.
It was mimicking this motion right here. The bump stock would go back and forth.
Comes just months after the Supreme Court voted to expand gun possession rights.
The Supreme Court has agreed to consider a challenge to the federal bump stock ban. Justices will hear arguments early next year over regulation.
Smashing it with sledgehammers to cutting it up with saws.
Just because a person might have used that product is not the American way.
Bump stock looks like what you would do is slide it over a rifle. It then enables the rifle to move back and forth.
Given the nationwide traffic in arms, there is little reason to believe that such devices will remain confined to the Fifth Circuit, she added. Lawyers for Cargill are also urging the Supreme Court to take up the challenge to ATF's bump stock ban, arguing that the definition of mash gun under federal law is an issue that affects many Americans. Americans bought 520,000 bump stocks during a 9-year span when they were legal, and the new prohibition requires them to be surrendered or destroyed, Cargill's attorneys said in a filing. Despite ATF's previous assurances that federal law permitted possession of a bump stock, the final rule now brands as criminals all those who ever possessed a bump stock, the lawyers wrote.
Nobody can seriously argue that you have to have this kind of a weapon for self-defense.
If you have one of these after today, you could face up to 10 years in prison or a hefty fine.
It is preventing the next mass shooting, and it is critical to cut off the easy access to these weapons of war.
Call on the United States Congress to ban assault rifles like the one used by the sick perpetrator of this mass killing.
Also, this bill was written with constitutionality in mind, so I definitely had a good feeling.
It has been happening everywhere all the time because you, Congress, have done nothing to prevent it.
Your right to own a gun can also be restricted.
Debating arm control, perspectives from Ben Shapiro and UK student. Ben Shapiro, a prominent 2A advocate, recently engaged in a debate tour in the UK, visiting prestigious universities like Oxford and Cambridge. The discussions primarily centered around arm control and the Second Amendment, showcasing a clash of perspectives. Shapiro, known for his staunch support of the Second Amendment, has faced criticisms in the past, notably from Piers Morgan on CNN, who accused him of demonizing those who disagreed, particularly in the context of the Sandy Hook tragedy.
Is you tend to demonize people who differ from you politically by standing on the graves of the children of Sandy Hook. And again, I think it's kind of based on circumstance. I'm not sure the entire United States is similar in this way. To me, what you would do about guns that would have prevented what happened in Sandy Hook, if you want to do what you did in the UK, right, which is ban virtually all guns, the idea of being able to protect myself and my family. I think owning a gun in order to do that is a good thing in the United States. Saying they don't seem to care enough about the dead kids. If they cared more about the dead kids, they would agree with you on policy. Would I see value in moving it away from that? I don't think it's that easy to move the culture away from that.
Morgan emphasized the need for a rational political conversation that considers the balance between rights, risks, and rewards associated with different policies. In response to a question about arm control, Shapiro referenced data from the Armed Violence Archive, citing 647 mass layings in the U.S. in 2023 and 2022. He argued that the marginal increase in freedom is worth the potential loss of life, but acknowledged that the concept of arm control is not universally applicable in the United States. Shapiro's argument centered around the historical context of the United States, where the right to bear arms is deeply ingrained in the resistance to government tyranny and self-defense. He contended that the widespread availability of arms has not led to a decrease in armed violence.
The Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, Mr. President, as you well know,
in order to satisfy the right to bear arms.
However, I think that the right to bear arms does not include owning nuclear weapons, for example.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, I find it interesting that my colleagues have no problem with the ATF going outside its boundaries.
Well, the society can protect you, and it depends on the possibility of a government going truly tyrannical and violating your core rights.
The debate also delved into cultural aspects, comparing the UK's ban on arms to the US. Shapiro argued that the UK's low incidence of mass layings is not solely due to the ban, but also the cultural context. He further discussed the potential need to ban knives in response to rising criminal activity, emphasizing the complexity of the issue. In conclusion, the ongoing debate reflected the nuanced and multifaceted nature of arm control discussions. Perspectives range from the historical significance of the Second Amendment to cultural differences between nations. The clash of opinions highlights the need for a comprehensive understanding of the issue, considering both constitutional principles and cultural contexts. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.